They brought it up in the church parking lot the first Sunday after Memorial Day, when the sun already felt like August on the blacktop and the choir director was wrestling a keyboard into the back of her hatchback. My mother didn't even clear her throat first. She just squared her shoulders, glanced toward the flag luffing above the roofline, and told me I needed to sell my house. My father looked past me at the hedges trimmed too tight along the walkway like the shape of a shrub could save him from what was about to get said, and I tasted metal even though I hadn't bit my tongue. She said the number $250,000 so quietly I thought I'd misheard until she repeated it, softer, like a secret shared on purpose. "Your sister's drowning," she said, and then she said my house out loud like it was a life raft sitting there and used out of spite. "I'm not selling my house," I said, and my voice came out low because you learn to keep your voice low in this family if you want anyone to hear you. "And you cut me out 5 years ago. Remember that part before we start passing other people's bills around?" "We did what we had to," my mother said, the words stacked neat like the paper plates she keeps for church potlucks. "Family decisions are not always fair in the short run." "Your sister's business." "Gym." "Studio." "Pop-up." "Whatever we're calling it this season," I said, and I looked at my father because he's the one who taught me that a budget is a plan and not a wish. He watched a sparrow hop along the curb and nodded like a man timing his breath with innings on a radio. "I'm not selling." "You made sure I was on my own." Dad shifted like the sidewalk had turned uneven. "We didn't cut you out of the family," he said, quiet. "We adjusted Granddad's trust because things changed and there were reasons." "You literally cut me out of a document," I said. "And then you told Aunt Patsy I was choosing my own road, when what you meant was we rolled the map up and hid it in the garage." The bell chimed the quarter hour with that sweet old sound that makes me think of itchy choir robes and powdered lemonade. The parking lot smelled like hot rubber and the fried chicken the grocery store sets out on Sundays. A boy ran past with his tie half off and his mother hissed his name like a prayer. I adjusted the toad on my shoulder. "I have a mortgage and a dog and a furnace that screams when the wind switches. I'm not selling to pay $250,000 because you endorsed your favorite child's spreadsheet with your eyes closed." My mother blinked slow, the way she does when she thinks patience is the same thing as power. "We'll talk at the house," she said. "After the 6 o'clock. Bring your checkbook so we can make a plan that looks grown." On the first Monday of the month, the local news ran a story about road work on Route 8 that would impact commutes for at least 2 weeks, and the anchor mispronounced our street again like he's never been north of town. I drove the 6 miles to my parents' split level after my shift at the community center and found the baseball pregame already murmuring in the den, the smell of lemon cleaner too strong in the kitchen. My sister Lena sat at the table with a stack of glossy brochures for wellness packages that looked like they were printed on a hope the printer didn't share. Her eyes were swollen in that way that says you've been crying on and off and aren't done. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said, before anyone even said hello. "The landlord doubled rent and the bank froze my line, and then the instructor who does Tuesdays took a job in Tampa, and you can't keep a schedule together by yourself. It's all timing, Mara. I just need a reset. Mom says if we sell your place we can clear the big note and the card balances and start clean." "You cut me out," I said, and the words felt boring in my mouth because I'd said them so many times in my head I'd worn the edges off. 5 years ago. The week after Granddad's funeral. Remember that? You changed the trust at your lawyer's office without telling me, then mailed me a photocopy that still smells like toner in my brain. You said I was independent, so I didn't need complications. Now you want me to sell the only thing that isn't a moving target. Dad rubbed the bridge of his nose and stared at the Braves pitcher warming up like a man who'd paid for single A and gotten big league noise by accident. "We're not here to relitigate," he said. "We're here to put numbers on a table and see what moves." "Start with who signed what," I said. Because unless my signature is on something I don't know about, nobody's putting a sign in my yard. Mom slid a folder across the table with those neat nails she keeps even when she swears she doesn't have time. Inside were statements, a couple letters with urgent all caps, and a spreadsheet that looked like a testimony written in Times New Roman. The big note was a business loan from a regional bank with a rate that had crept up until it looked like a warning. There was a second, smaller loan, an SBA thing Lena kept tapping with her index finger as if she could tap the balance down. There were 3 cards I didn't recognize, one with Founders in the name, which made my scalp prickle. Who co-signed? I asked, though I already knew the answer, and my mother's jaw flexed like she was chewing an idea she didn't like the taste of. We did, she said. On the big one. The cards are hers. The SBA is complicated. Of course it is, I said. What do you want from me exactly besides my deed? Sell the bungalow, my mother said, as if she were requesting I bring a potato salad to a picnic. You bought it for $150 back when interest was a joke. You could get $310 easy with the market the way it is. Pay off the $250, keep the rest for your little nest egg, and move in with us for a year. No rent. No worries. Family together. We reset. Everybody wins. You want me to sell the only thing I own to pay for the fact that you co-signed your favorite kid's gamble after you cut me out of the thing Granddad meant for both of us, I said. And your pitch is I can move back into the room with the slanted ceiling and pretend this is what adults do on purpose. Lena's voice went small and high at once. It's not a gamble, Mara. It's my career. I help people feel better in their bodies. I don't want to be judged for trying. This isn't judgment, I said, and I kept my tone soft because anger makes my words brittle and I needed them to carry. It's math. And history. And a mortgage with my name on it. On the second Tuesday after PDA night, a certified letter showed up in my mailbox and I felt my stomach drop before I even slid my finger under the flap. It was from the bank that held Lena's big note, addressed to me as an interested party, which made my hands sweat. It offered options if I wanted to explore liquidation of assets for an amicable resolution and included a line about how the family has indicated your property may be listed. I sat on my front steps with the letter in my lap and neighborhood sprinklers ticking in the background like a clock no one sets. My block smelled like cut grass and gasoline and lasagna from somebody's open kitchen window. Across the street, Mr. Garcia set a garage sale table on his driveway with a neat row of battered paperbacks and a lamp with a shade that wasn't going to make it through the weekend. I folded the letter back into its envelope and felt the muscles in my neck go hard. I called my mother. You gave my name to a bank, I said. And my address. You told them I was selling. We are brainstorming, she said, bright like a phone operator who gets graded on Upspeak. No one has done anything legal. The banker is in our Sunday school class. He's only trying to help. You cut me out 5 years ago, and you still found a way to write my name on a debt, I said. Stop giving people my address. That Friday the Braves lost by 1, and my father texted me a sad face he thought was a baseball. And on Saturday morning, I went to Aunt Ruth's garage sale on Birch, because she always underprices the good stuff, and because being around Ruth is like sitting in a room with the windows open. Ruth is my mother's older sister by 18 months, and the only person who ever told Mom to hush out loud. She stood behind a folding table lined with old pie plates and a stack of church cookbooks with spiral bindings and said she had a box of Granddad's things I might want. Your mother said she didn't have room for old papers, she added, not bothering to smooth it. And I don't like throwing away anything that could bite later. We hauled the box to the shade under her maple and popped the lid. It smelled like old paper and motor oil, the latter because Granddad used his garage as a filing cabinet and a place to keep the mower that never started right. Inside were folded maps, receipts from a feed store that closed before Lena was born, and a file folder with the name of the law firm that handled Granddad's estate. I slid the folder out and felt that prickly electricity under my skin that shows up when you know something and hope you don't. There was the original trust, dated 9 years ago, with both our names in a neat 50-50 column, and the amendment from 5 years ago with my name struck out. Initialed by Granddad's shaky hand and notarized by a woman whose signature I recognized because she used to babysit me and still wears her hair in a high ponytail on Sundays. Aunt Ruth watched me read like she was timing a cake. "They told me you didn't want the headache," she said, eyes steady. "Said you'd said as much across iced tea at the funeral lunch." I didn't buy it, but I wasn't in the room. When I saw the notary name, I raised a brow. Not that anybody noticed, because people only look where they feel like looking. "I never said that," I said, and my throat went dry the way it does when you've stepped on a nail and your body is busy cataloging the damage. "They changed it that week. Without telling me. Then cut me out of everything but the family text chain full of chain prayers." Ruth's mouth tightened and then softened. "You know what their version will be," she said. "They'll say you were independent. They'll say your sister needed it more. They'll say the trust was always more theirs than yours because Granddad lived in their house, even though he paid for the back porch you're sitting on with cash from mowing lawns when he was 72. I held the papers like they were a hot plate and then slid them back into the folder because you don't wave documents like flags unless you mean to fight that minute. I looked out at the street where a kid wobbled past on a bike 2 sizes too big and a woman in a visor compared 2 used crockpots like they would tell her something she didn't already know from the handles. "What do you need from me?" Ruth asked, and she said it like a person offering a cup of cold water instead of advice. "Because we're past the part where not picking a side is kindness." "I need you to remember dates if anyone asks," I said. "And I need the original copy of whatever you have. I'll make a scan and bring it back. Also, if you hear Mom telling people I'm moving back home to make room in my life for sacrifices, you can tell her I'm allergic." Ruth snorted in that unladylike way that made me love her since I was 5. "You got it," she said. "And for what it's worth, your grandfather said the same thing every December when someone asked him to pick sides about the Christmas Eve menu." By the second Sunday, Mom cornered me in the church hallway with that smile she uses like a password. "Don't make this ugly," she said under her breath, as the usher's kid tried to balance bulletins like a magician. "We can be decent. List the house this week and start packing. Your sister's lender has agreed to a reduced payoff if we move swiftly. It's a miracle. Don't throw it away to prove a point." "That's not a miracle," I said. "That's a bank doing math. And I'm not moving." She tilted her head like she heard a frequency other people didn't. "You're making a spectacle. People are already asking questions. Mrs. Klein told me she saw you at Ruth's sale going through a box with a lawyer's name on it." "This is exactly what I meant when I said you like attention. I like paper with signatures on it," I said. "And while we're being honest in the Lord's hallway, stop giving the bank my address." Dad stepped up then, holding a stack of hymnals like a man who knows props make him useful. He looked tired in the way men do when they're trying to be the hinge between 2 doors that insist on slamming. "Let's talk at home," he said. "After the game. I don't want to do this by the donuts." At 3 that afternoon, the Braves went into extra innings and lost anyway, and the room held the kind of quiet loss drops in a living room like a spare blanket. My mother sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded like a schoolgirl mimicking obedience. My father poured coffee because he likes his rituals. I put the original trust copy on the table and then the amendment, and I watched my mother's mouth press flat. "You went to Ruth," she said without looking at the paper. "Of course you did. I went to Granddad's box," I said. "It just happened to be at Ruth's. This says one thing in 2016 and another in 2019. You took my name off. You didn't tell me until after you made it legal." That wasn't a family decision. That was a signature party I wasn't invited to. We told you the month after, my mother said, which is the kind of sentence that makes you want to knock over a salt shaker. You didn't object. You wanted to be independent. I didn't object because I didn't think I could change it, I said. I had just bought a house with a roof that leaks every time the wind forgets its manners. I picked my battles. That doesn't make me a piggy bank you can cash out 5 years later when your favorites numbers don't add. Lena came in then, hair damp from a shower, face bare like she'd scrubbed it to start over. I'll pay you back, she said. If you sell, I'll set up automatic transfers. I'll sign a napkin. Whatever you need. I just need to not suffocate right now. My chest hurt in that way that makes you want to lie down on the cool tile and breathe through your shirt. I'm not selling, Lena, I said. I'm sorry you're in a hole. I didn't dig it. I don't climb well when you're pushing me down to use me as a step. Families do hard things, my mother said. You'll understand when you have children. I am a child, I said, and it came out wrong, because I'm 32 and pay my own property tax and know exactly how many pounds of salt it takes to make the driveway safe in January. I'm your child. You cut me out and now you want me back on your balance sheet. No. That night, after I left their house with the papers zipped into my tote and the taste of coffee turning sour on my tongue, my porch light flickered and then steadied. Across the street, the little yard sale had packed up, and Mr. Garcia dragged his card table back into the garage with a grunt. The air smelled like cut grass and the faint sweetness of someone's dryer sheet. I sat on my front steps with the dog leaning into my knee and made a list in my head I didn't write down because lists left on refrigerators become evidence. The list wasn't complicated. It had 3 lines. Call a lawyer, talk to the bank without my parents' voices in the room, and find out what exactly the SBA complicated part meant. On the second Monday, the community center copier jammed, a kid spilled apple juice on the gym floor, and Mrs. Torres asked me if the pickleball schedule could include more, after dinner, slots, because her knees are better after 7. At lunch, I drove 4 miles to the county building and asked the clerk how to see UCC filings. She didn't blink at my question because this is the Midwest and we file for things even when we don't know exactly what they do. She slid a laminated instruction sheet across the counter and pointed to a terminal with a screen so old it looked like it remembered dial-up. I searched my sister's name, my parents' names, the business name Lena had used when she registered her LLC last spring. 3 hits. The big bank on the equipment and accounts receivable. A smaller bank on a line of credit that looked like it had been opened on a Tuesday in March when the snow was bent on staying. And an SBA lien that included a collateral line referencing all proceeds and rights of beneficiary interests, which made my skin go cold because beneficiary interests are not supposed to be chips people tell you are complicated in a kitchen. I paid the $3 for copies and walked into the hot, bright day with the sound of a lawn crew's trimmers in my throat. The first act should have ended with me slamming a door or throwing a plate, but what we do here instead is we close the folder and put it on a chair only we use. The sudden betrayal wasn't so sudden. It was 5 years old and still breathing. The new part was the first official letter with my name on it and the knowledge that somewhere a loan officer had typed my address into a field because someone called them from a number saved as home. I stood in the parking lot with the papers under my arm and the blacktop baking through the soles of my sandals and decided the plan was not to rage. The plan was to stay still long enough to hear myself think, then move like the next step couldn't be argued with, because sometimes that's what stops a family from rolling right over you, a step so ordinary nobody can narrate it into a sin. On the first Wednesday of the month, Ms. Patel from the community center's free legal clinic spread my papers across a folding table that still smelled faintly like floor wax and basketballs. She wears her hair in a long braid and keeps a pen clipped to her shirt collar like a coach. I handed her the certified letter, the UCC printouts, the trust and the amendment, and the copy of the amicable resolution note that had slid into my mailbox like a dare. She read without talking for a long 2 minutes while a pickleball thumped in the gym and someone outside in the hallway argued about whether the air conditioning was too high. First thing, she said, tapping the letter with her pen, you are not a borrower or guarantor on your sister's business debt. You don't have privity with any of these lenders. They can't offer you liquidation options like you're a party. If they keep contacting you after you tell them to stop, we escalate. She lifted the trust. Second, the amendment. It's valid on its face. That's a fight only if you want it to be a fight. My question is timing this date, then this SBA filing 3 months later, and the big bank note 5 months after that. She pointed to the screen grabs I'd printed. They moved your name off, then leveraged what remained. I figured, I said, and my voice was steady, which surprised me. I needed to hear someone else say it. She slid a 1-page letter template toward me. Send this to every lender that has contacted you or is likely to. Cease and desist contacting me. I am not a party or guarantor. Do not list or reference my property. Certified mail. Keep the receipts in a folder with a tab. And Mara, stop arguing about this in hallways. Paper is your friend when everybody else is playing telephone. I swallowed because the back of my throat had gone dry. They put my address in a banker's mouth. I don't know how to unhear that. You don't need to unhear it, she said, gentler now. You need to make it irrelevant. That's different. She flipped the trust. There's another road. I'm not saying it's pretty, just that it exists. If your parents' guarantee puts their house on the line, they're going to push the only other house in the family that isn't already encumbered. You can make a counterweight. You can force a boundary in writing that doesn't read like a threat but functions like one. She wrote 3 words on a sticky note. Document, mediate, condition. Condition what? I asked. Any help, she said. On something they value. Don't offer money. Offer non-money relief if they reverse what made this possible. Force them to pick, optics or outcomes. I walked out with the letter draft, my hands cold even in the heat, and stopped at the UPS store on the way home because if I didn't drop those envelopes certified right then, I'd start thinking the talk was the action. The clerk with the nose ring slapped stickers on 5 green cards and slid them back to me with a smile like this was the easiest part of her day. You want the delivery emails, she asked. Or just the receipts? Both, I said, because there's a part of me that is my father's daughter no matter how mad I am. By Saturday, the heat came back up and the garage sales sprouted like mushrooms. I put a free box on my porch with a cracked planter and 3 mismatched mugs just to make the block look friendlier and watched a woman from 2 streets over carry off the planter like she'd just found a treasure. Around noon, a gray SUV rolled slow to a stop in front of my bungalow, and my mother got out with a man in a polo. He didn't have a yard sign in his hand, but he didn't need to. You can spot a realtor from 100 feet by the way they look at a roofline. I came off the porch before they reached the walk because I didn't have patience for theater. You can't walk through the house, I said. Not today, not any day. Not without notice, not without a key, and not without me inviting you. The man tried a smile meant for the public. We'd just like to get a sense of the layout, he said. Low inventory this summer. Buyers for miles. My daughter is being dramatic, Mom said to him, like I wasn't standing there. We're exploring options. Everyone will be decent once the numbers are on paper. My house isn't an option, I said. It's my home. Explore something else. He shifted his folder under his arm, saw that this wasn't a lead that would convert without a headline, and told us to have a nice day. The SUV pulled away. My mother stood on my sidewalk like a general who'd just been told the road was flooded. You're going to make this ugly, she said, and then, as if on cue, a police cruiser turned the corner and parked under the oak across the street. Mr. Garcia, sweeping his driveway, looked up and frowned. The officer walked toward us slow and careful, the way they're trained to when they don't know if a dog's going to come around a corner or a man with a bad idea is going to open a door. "Ma'am," he said to me, eyes friendly enough, "we got a call about a family dispute in the street." "Everything okay?" "It will be in 1 minute," I said, and I kept my tone even because anything else would have made my mother's case for her. "They're leaving." "She won't let me see the inside," my mother said, as if law enforcement collects keys when children disobey. The officer's mouth twitched. "It's her house," he said, like a man stating the forecast. "If you're not on the deed or a lease, you're guests. Guests go when the owner says go. Can you folks take this somewhere else?" My mother looked like she wanted to say 3 different things, settled on none, and adjusted her purse strap. "We'll talk later," she said, which is her version of a promise and a threat at once. She walked back to her car. The cruiser rolled away. Mr. Garcia finished sweeping like none of it had surprised him. That night, after the late game, I drove to the high school because the summer league had a scrimmage, and sometimes there's no better place to listen to your own thoughts than a set of metal bleachers under stadium lights with a concession stand selling warm bottled water. Kim, the notary who used to babysit me and now runs the license bureau counter, sat 2 rows down with a toddler on her lap. When the inning's last out popped up over short, I slid down a step and said her name. She turned with that alert look notaries get, like everyone is about to ask them whether a signature counts as a signature. "You notarized the amendment," I said, gentle, not accusing, just laying the words down like a card. "I notarized a signature," she said, wary and plain. "I didn't write your name off the page." "I know," I said. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to ask if you remember anything that—" I paused because I didn't want to feed her lines. "Sticks." She looked past the field for a second, toward town, toward the water tower that always has a ring of rust nobody budgets for. "Your grandfather looked tired," she said. "Your parents did most of the talking." I asked him if he understood, because I always ask, and he said he did. Then your mother explained it again, and he nodded when she spoke, and I remember thinking how much it looked like those nights I watched you in their kitchen. Your mom giving you the recipe from the doorway and you stirring and looking back at her to see if you were doing it right. She shifted the toddler to her other knee. It wasn't illegal. It didn't feel good. "That's what I remember." "That helps," I said. "I'm not going to make you swear to anything you don't want to own. If anybody asks, I'll say you said he looked tired. That's all." She winced. "Don't make me part of the sermon, Mara." "I won't," I said. "I promise." On Monday, the bank officer from Sunday school, Deacon Jim, called because Miss Patel's letter had reached his desk and he decided a phone call could make it go away. I took it in the community center break room, with a vending machine humming behind me and a bulletin board full of flyers for youth softball and a blood drive. "I want to assure you we're trying to help your family," he said, in the tone used for funerals and committee meetings. "No one is trying to take your home." "You sent me a letter that suggested exactly that," I said, not unkindly, just straight. "And you called me an interested party to a loan I didn't sign." "That was a courtesy," he said. "Your parents are on the hook, and they've indicated they'll solve this. We assumed you would be included in that solution. The bank is a neighbor in this town." "Your neighbor language doesn't change the math," I said. "What's the fallback if we're not included?" He exhaled. "Then the guarantees stand," he said. "And we proceed." "With their house," I said. "With any pledged collateral," he said, official again. Then, after a beat he probably didn't plan to give, he added, lower, "There is a settlement option on the table, a discounted payoff if someone can bring 6 figures quickly. Your sister's not equipped. Your parents are house rich and cash poor." We thought. "You thought I'd sell my bungalow and show up like a savior," I said, my heart thudding hard. not from surprise, but from the way a truth lands when it hits the one spot you were pretending didn't exist. You thought the cutout child would pay to clean up a mess you greenlight. I thought you'd want to keep your parents' roof safe, he said, and there it was, the part nobody had said out loud. The number is 110. Before the end of the month. I stared at the flyer for the blood drive. I don't like being told to pick which house loses, I said. You might tell your committee we're trying a different kind of math. On Tuesday after PDA, I sat at Aunt Ruth's kitchen table with 2 mugs of grocery store coffee that tasted better than it had any right to in her thin blue cups. They put their house up, I said, sliding the bank settlement letter across the table for her to read, my finger on the date so she could feel the clock like I did. They didn't tell me because they wanted to keep their argument simple, sell mine, save hers. She read slow, then set the page down without smoothing it because she doesn't perform paper. So he thought you'd sell out to keep their roof, she said. And now he's wearing his deacon tie to ask for mercy. I don't want their house to be the price of my no, I said. I also don't want my no to be paper thin. Then don't make it about houses, she said. Make it about the thing that made it possible for yours to be on the table. She tapped the trust amendment with 2 fingers, and the story they've been telling themselves about fairness for 5 years. It's still money, I said. Even if the story changes. The bank wants actual dollars. How do I give them a boundary instead? She leaned back and looked through the kitchen window at the maple that drops helicopter seeds for 6 weeks and never remembers to stop. You don't give the bank a boundary, she said. You give your parents a condition. You tell them you will help, not with cash, not with a sale, help with what you can touch and document. You'll help settle the studio lease with the landlord because half of the whole is back rent and fees. You'll take a day off to sit at the SBA office on Pine and make sure the release they promised actually prints. You'll go with your sister to return those leased reformer machines so they stop billing. You'll run errands they don't want to admit are theirs. And you will do all of that only after the trust is restored 70-30 or 60-40 or 50-50 if you're feeling generous. Not to get dollars. To correct the lever they pulled to make this possible. Put it in writing. Hand it to the only person in town they can't sneer at without losing sleep. Pastor, I said. He'll sit us down where they can't shout. Good, she said. Make them choose their version of themselves in public. You're not their bank, you're their mirror. By Friday, I had the letter drafted because Miss Patel had offered to look it over if I promised to keep the tone plain. I kept it to a page and used a lot of white space because dense paragraphs make my mother comb for tone like a lice check. It said I would not sell my house. It said I would help Lena unwind the mess by handling the calls and sitting in the offices and lifting boxes out of her storage unit so she didn't pay another month. It said I would do that only if the trust amendment was rescinded and a new document filed returning the beneficiary's structure to the original balance, with a small carve-out that acknowledged Granddad's cash gift to Lena for her first lease. It said I would not attend any more ambush conversations in the church parking lot, and that our future talks would be at the church office with Pastor Lee or at Aunt Ruth's kitchen table with coffee and a timer. I printed 2 copies, signed them, and put them in my tote behind a stack of catalogs so I didn't start rehearsing the speech version. Then I went to the storage unit with Lena because part of beating a family script is doing the dull thing they're sure you'll refuse. The unit smelled like rubber mats and lavender cleaner and the sweet, sad scent of sweat that doesn't have a home. We loaded the back of my SUV with boxes of branded water bottles and a whole case of flyers that still said grand opening in a font I felt vaguely sorry for. I didn't mean to make it your problem, Lena said, lifting a box with a wince. I know you think I wanted you cut out. I didn't. I just didn't say anything when it happened because it looked like a gift I wasn't supposed to look too close at. I don't think you asked, I said. I think you benefited. There's a difference. She set the box down and wiped her face with her sleeve. Will you hate me if I move to Tampa and start over as a trainer in a gym that doesn't have my name on the door? I will hate the humidity for you, I said. That's it. That Sunday after church, I walked into the office where Pastor Lee keeps spare bulletins and a plant he forgot to water last month and set my letter on the desk. My parents sat side by side in 2 chairs that squeak if you shift and tried not to fidget. Pastor put on his glasses and read the page in the measured way people read when they don't want to mispronounce anything important. He nodded after the first paragraph. He paused and reread the condition line twice, then set the page down and folded his hands. This is clear, he said. This is kind in the way that matters. Mom bristled. It's not kind to ask us to undo something your grandfather signed, she said. It's gloating. It's asking you to honor what he said first, I said. Before you decided you knew better for me. Dad stared at the plant like he could will it back to green. If we undo it, he said slowly, you'll help. I will help with tasks, I said. I will not bring money. I will not bring my deed. I will bring my time and my hands and my calendar and my spine. Mom's mouth tightened. Your sister needs dollars, not a spine. She needs a boundary so she can stop pretending the bank is a committee she can charm, I said. And you need one so you stop calling it love when it's control. The room went so quiet I could hear the copier out in the secretary's alcove breathe. Pastor folded the letter again, neat like a napkin. What is your answer? He asked my parents, not unkindly, just the way a man asks who is tired of hearing people circle something without landing. Not here, my mother said. We won't be pushed in a church office. Then at Aunt Ruth's, I said, standing because if I didn't I was going to start shaking. Tuesday at 6. I'll bring pizza. You bring a pen. On Tuesday, the sky turned the color of a bruise around 7 and never quite rained. Aunt Ruth's kitchen smelled like onions and dish soap. The pizza sat on the counter cooling because nobody had enough appetite to be helpful. My father looked like he'd lost a bet he'd made with himself. My mother held my letter with 2 fingers like it might stain. You're proud of yourself, she said without heat, which scared me more than when she's spitting nails. You found a way to make us choose in front of people we respect. I found a way to stop the phone calls, I said. There's a difference. Dad rubbed his thumb along a chipped spot on Ruth's table. If we undo it, he said, and the bank still comes, and we still lose the house, will you feel good about your boundary? No, I said, and my throat tightened. I'll feel like our family traded truth for a roof, and I'll do what I can to carry boxes. That's all I can promise. I'm not a bank. I'm your daughter. Lena had been quiet in the corner, making sure the dog didn't get into the pizza box, like she always does when any table turns into a council. Do it, she said to my parents, surprising all of us. Undo it. I don't want to stand on something that was taken from her. If I go to Tampa, I don't want this following me like an unpaid bill that shows up when I fill out a rental application. Mom closed her eyes and opened them again. You think this makes you noble, she said to me, not to Lena. You think this will fix whatever happened 5 years ago. I think it will stop the worst part from happening again, I said. That's enough for a Tuesday. That night ended without a signature because people like my mother do not sign things at kitchen tables without witnesses and stamps and a plan to tell the story their way after. We set a time with Pastor for Thursday at 4, which is a slot right after he finishes hospital visits and before the youth group shows up to pretend they're not hungry. I drove home in the kind of quiet that makes the sound of your own turn signal feel like a metronome. My phone buzzed at a light. MS. Patel had written, if they sign, we file. If they stall, we file the settlement letter with your rejection and record your cease and desists. Paper first. On Thursday at 4, Mom arrived with 2 copies of a new amendment drafted by their lawyer, who had used phrases like equalize and restore that made my shoulders loosen a fraction. Dad clicked a pen. Pastor stapled. I signed as an acknowledged party, which wasn't legally necessary, but felt like a ritual I needed. Mom signed last, her jaw tight. This is your victory lap, she said, Not angry, not resigned. Something in between. Enjoy it. This is our reset, I said. Let's not eat paper for dinner. She made a face that meant she was going to complain about the pizza 2 days late, then didn't. Now what? She asked. Now that you've gotten your paper. Now we go to the SBA office on Pine tomorrow morning at 9, I said. And we get the release you keep calling complicated, printed on letterhead. Then we take those reformer leases back to the warehouse. Then we sit in the landlord's office and negotiate the back rent into a number that doesn't look like a ransom. Then you tell Deacon Jim we're not selling my house and we never were, and you stop using words like embarrassment and spectacle when you mean outcome I didn't pick. She stared at me for a full beat. You rehearsed that. I did, I said. And I wrote it down so if I forget, I can hand you the paper. Friday morning, the SBA office on Pine smelled like old carpet and coffee that had been waiting too long. We took a number like we were getting cold cuts. The woman at the window had a perm that made me feel safe. She looked up the file, clicked twice, frowned, and said the release had been approved 3 weeks earlier and was sitting in a queue because the signatory had been out sick. I can print an interim letter, she said. It's ugly, but it counts. The official one will come in the mail. Mom took the letter like a person being handed a newborn for the first time and not quite sure how to hold the head. It's just a letter, she said. It's a way to stop a fee from rolling over on your daughter, the clerk said, in a tone that didn't brook argument. Sometimes paper saves you. Don't look down on it. We drove to the warehouse and returned the leased machines, which smelled like sweat and lemon cleaner, the same two smells that hang in any room where people try to be better. The warehouse manager signed a clipboard. Lena cried next to a stack of boxes and then wiped her face and helped me push a dolly. We ate bad sandwiches in the parking lot at 2:30, the sun doing that Midwestern thing where it cooks the dashboard no matter where you park. My mother's phone buzzed 3 times with texts she ignored, then she finally looked at me. We undid it, she said. I hope you don't think I'm going to thank you with a parade. I hope you think you can sit at my table without telling me to take the legs off, I said. That evening, Aunt Ruth sent a photo of the maple in her yard with a caption that said, Look, you can see the sky again, and I sat on my steps with my dog and held my phone and didn't respond because sometimes you don't narrate the moment that might be the hinge. The Braves were on the TV through my neighbor's open window, the announcer's voice easing into the room with the comfort of a man who has called more losses than wins and keeps going anyway. My certified green cards from the cease and desist letters came back in the mail with the neat little signatures nobody reads unless they have to. I tucked them behind the trust copy in my folder and closed the drawer. The month had tilted toward the last week, and part of me wanted clean relief. That wasn't coming. What was coming was a set of steps we'd have to take in shoes that didn't match. The biggest challenge was ahead, the part where my parents had to tell their version of the story without making me the villain, and where my sister had to decide if she could leave town without turning her goodbye into a scene. I turned off the porch light and stood for an extra second in the dark, just to feel what it felt like to not be watched. By the last Monday of the month, the humidity had settled in like a houseguest with a suitcase, and the local news kept promising an evening thunderstorm that never quite made up its mind. I woke to the soft thud of the paper on my porch and a text from Pastor Lee that just said, "You did the hard part. Now routine." Routine didn't feel small. Routine meant getting my sister out of a lease without turning the landlord into a lifelong enemy, making sure the SBA letter didn't disappear into a stack on someone's desk, and getting my parents through the next Sunday without another ambush in a parking lot under a flag with one hinge squeaking. I set my coffee on the step, checked the certified mail tracking one more time, and saw the green cards recorded as delivered, and told myself out loud that it was okay to breathe even if the bank calendar still had a circle around Friday like a birthday you didn't plan to celebrate. On Tuesday after PDA, the studio smelled like lavender spray and old rubber when we rolled the last of the reformer machines across the concrete to the loading dock, and my palms got that tacky feeling they get when the air is thick and the metal is warm to the touch. The landlord, a man in his 60s who wears a ball cap with the name of a boat he doesn't own, met us in his office where the blinds never get dusted. He had run the numbers like a person who actually wants to recoup what he can rather than punish a person he'll never see again. "You paint the wall where that logo was," he said, tapping a clipboard with a pen that had run out of ink, patch the anchor points, clean the mats you're keeping, and turn in both keys by Thursday. "I'll forgive last month's rent and half the late fees. I'm not a bank. I want my space back more than I want your slow money." Lena nodded like a student who had finally gotten a problem right. I said we'd return Friday morning to hand over the keys because Thursday afternoon we had to sit at the county office for the SBA letter with the right letterhead. And he said he'd be here with a receipt that made everything feel like a period at the end of a sentence instead of a comma after a long clause. Wednesday night a storm finally arrived, the kind that rattles the windows and flattens the grass and makes the smell of rain bounce off the driveway like somebody shook out an old sweatshirt. I lay on top of the covers with the dog at my knees and the ball game lowered to a murmur, and when the power flickered I counted Mississippi the way my father taught me in the hallway when we were little. The clock on my cable box blinked 12 o'clock 3 times, and then went back to 9:41 like it had been bullied into remembering. I thought about the trust papers and the clean blue ink of my mother's signature, and felt that odd mix of relief and ache that hits your chest when something you earned finally lands, and you realize the landing isn't a party, it's a starting gun. Thursday at 9 we sat under fluorescent lights that made everyone look like we needed an extra hour of sleep and waited for our number to show on the board at the SBA desk on Pine. The clerk with the perm gave us the official release on the letterhead with the watermark you can see when you tilt the page against the light, and when she slid it across the counter my mother took it with both hands like she was handling a newborn. We stopped at the bank on the way back because part of the point of my boundary was that I wasn't going to let Deacon Jim run a version of the story where I was still a holdout. He came out to the lobby with a tight smile and a tie that looked like it had been ironed that morning by someone with high standards, and I set the SBA release on the table between us and said we weren't selling the bungalow and we never were, and that the studio would be empty by Friday morning with a receipt to prove it, and that he should remove my address from every field that had the nerve to include it. He said the bank appreciated good faith steps, and my mother gripped her purse like a lifeline and said we were asking for a fresh payment plan for the remainder that didn't start with the assumption that somebody's house was going to move. "She's not paying a dime," she said, and she said it with her chin positioned in that way that tells me a person is learning new language under stress. "But she's carrying boxes and sitting at desks and making sure people print what they say they will. That counts. If you're the neighbor you say you are, count it." Friday morning the landlord walked the empty studio with us, checked the patch jobs and the paint, ran a single finger over the window ledge like he was fighting an urge to pass judgment and found nothing to catch, then wrote, "Paid, possession returned" across the top of the last invoice, signed his name, and handed copies to me and to Lena. The pen etched through the paper. The sound of the nib against the counter sounded louder than it should have. Lena hugged him in that way you hug someone you can't expect to hug you back, and he patted her shoulder like a man who has a daughter someplace. And then he locked the door behind us, and the echo inside the empty room made my sister step back like the sound had jumped at her. Saturday the town did what it always does when the weather gives us a break. Garage sales popped up on the map like pins. The farmer's market sold out of peaches by 10 and corn by noon. And the church had a table by the gazebo where 3 women sold homemade relish for $5 a jar and pretended to be offended when you didn't know whose recipe it was. I stood by Aunt Ruth's card table while she argued with a woman about the price of a set of church cookbooks with spiral bindings and watched the mailbox across the street in case the envelope with the bank's decision arrived a day early, which it wasn't going to do because banks do not arrive early for people who ask them to adjust a field in a database. My father walked over holding 2 corn dogs and a bottle of water and pretended the corn dogs were for me and the water was for him, and he asked how much a person is supposed to tip the guy who whistles while he bags peaches. And Aunt Ruth said if a man is whistling that well, you don't insult him with a dollar bill you barely look at. Mom showed up 20 minutes later with 2 bags of green beans and a jar of pickles she'd picked up after telling the relish table that she didn't eat relish and she didn't use her phone once. Not even when the woman from the club walked by with her little dog and a nod that tried to do too much. Sunday was the test because people talk on Sundays, not just the ordained ones. We sat in the 3rd pew like always, and the organist missed a pedal and the bell chimed the hour and Mrs. Klein tried to hand me a sign-up sheet for the casserole train even though 3 people got to it before me with the kind of pens that leave a groove in the paper. After the benediction, my mother didn't bolt for the parking lot. She stood by the coffee urn and poured cups for 2 women who still use mercy as a sentence and a weapon, and when one of them asked whether we had worked out that property situation, Mom said we had returned the studio keys and filed a piece of paper that restored the trust the way it was supposed to be, and that Mara was not selling anything, and then she put a lid on the coffee cup and handed it to the woman like she was passing over a punctuation mark. You can feel a rumor run out of gas when the person who feeds it stops offering refills. On Monday, as if the calendar needed a flourish, a letter from the bank arrived with my parents' name in the window and a tone that tried to sound firm and neighborly at the same time. They were offering a 2-part plan. The SBA release would remove a set of fees if proof of surrender of the leased equipment had been filed, and an extended repayment schedule would activate upon 3 consecutive payments made on time starting in 30 days. The house was not off the table forever. It was no longer being used as the first threat in the paragraph. There was a line about the bank recognizing extraordinary efforts by the family, which made me laugh once without humor in my kitchen, and then fold the letter and put it under a magnet shaped like a green pepper because there was no point pretending paper doesn't live on refrigerators as well as in safes. My father texted a photo of him holding the letter like a ticket to a matinee and wrote that he was going to repair the screen on their back porch himself this week because he needed to fix something that didn't argue back. The biggest challenge arrived the next day anyway, because endings don't have good manners. The women's group announced on their Facebook page a love offering at the Wednesday night supper to ease a burden we all share, and included the words young entrepreneur and family sacrifice in the same sentence without punctuation. Aunt Ruth screenshotted it and sent it to me with a timestamp and 3 dots that didn't need words underneath. I stood in my kitchen with my phone in my hand and felt that old familiar shaky feeling in my shoulders because I knew what this was. It wasn't a fundraiser, it was a way to write a story on top of mine. I called Pastor Lee. He said he hadn't seen the post because he pretends his flip phone protects him, and I read it to him, and he sighed, and then he said I should come to supper and sit next to my mother at a table by the window and let my body speak before my mouth did. Bring the paper, he said. Set it next to your roll. People will pretend they're not looking. Let them look. Wednesday night, the fellowship hall smelled like green beans that had been cooked too long in a good way, and rolls that crush down into themselves when you butter them. The kind woman who always wears a rose brooch pinned to the same sweater every season handed out plates and told people to move down because the men's Bible study was late and they would be hungry, and they would not be shy about taking the last of the potatoes. My mother looked like she'd braced herself to do carpool in a thunderstorm. Her jaw didn't unclench even when Pastor told a joke about the copier and the devil, and that joke kills in this room. When the women's group president cleared her throat and stood with a little basket that had a bow someone had tied from that thin ribbon that never lies flat, I slid the SBA release and the landlord's receipt and the bank plan onto the table next to my cup and folded my hands so I wouldn't fidget. "We want to be a blessing," the president said, and the room hummed because people here like to bless almost as much as we like to sell things from our garages. This family has carried a heavy load. We can lighten it, and we can show the kind of love that travels farther than dollars. My mother stood up before she did what she used to do best, which is let other people put words in her mouth. She put her hand on the paper I'd laid out and took a breath that made the tight muscles in her neck show under her skin. "We're grateful," she said, and her voice didn't crack, which is how you know she wasn't doing this to put on a show. "We're also okay. We have a plan with the bank. The business is closed. The keys are back. The only thing my family needs from this church right now is your promise to stop guessing what our next move is. If you want to bless us with quiet. And if you want to bless the town, put money toward the youth sports fund because their uniforms are older than some of the coaches." There was a little laugh at that, and she turned to look at me in a way that didn't ask permission and didn't seek approval. It just made space. "My daughter kept her house," she said, and even though that sentence could have been said with spite, she didn't lace it with anything sharp, and she kept her head, and she kept us from making a mess bigger than the one we already had. That's the love offering that counts tonight. The basket sat on the table in front of the women's group president like a prop nobody quite knew what to do with now. Pastor stepped in the way he steps in when a child drops a cup and the noise scares the room more than the spill. "Amen," he said, not in a performance way, just like a punctuation you can't ignore. "We'll direct any gifts intended for this to the Youth Sports Fund unless you tell us otherwise." Lena slid into the seat next to me so fast her chair made a sound against the linoleum that made two heads turn. Her eyes were red in that way that makes a person look younger and older at the same time. "I was going to let them pass the basket," she whispered, and her whisper had sand in it, the kind that says you've been fighting yourself all afternoon. "I wanted someone else to fix the part one broke." "I'm sorry." "You didn't break all of it," I said, and I meant it because after a month of this I could finally see the part where the family machine did some of the damage without you needing to climb inside it. "You get to fix your part. I get to fix mine. Mom gets to fix hers. Dad gets to watch a game with the sound on and not worry about who's counting the dollars on the screen." Thursday morning, the Tampa recruiter called my sister back and offered her a position at a gym near the water where the trainers make decent money off tourists who want to say they worked out on vacation and locals who want to outlast their knees. She came over in the afternoon with a printout of the email and 2 boxes of things she didn't want to store: cables, bands, a label maker that had decided to print the same 2 letters over and over until the tape ran out, and asked if she could borrow my dolly on Sunday after church to move the last of her personal stuff from the studio to her car. "I'll pay you back," she said, and then she stopped because I think we both felt the weight of how tired the phrase had gotten in a month. "I'm going to send you photos of palm trees you don't want to see," she said instead, and I said she could send me photos of grocery store receipts so I could tell her when she's being gouged on avocados. Friday afternoon, I mowed the front patch of grass and accidentally cut too close to the violets that pop up in the part of the yard that refuses to be tamed, and the smell of cut green rose up off the mower deck like a memory of June field days. My neighbor stopped to talk about the ball game like his opinion of the bullpen constituted strategy, and my mother's car pulled to the curb 2 minutes before the mail truck rolled up because she times her drives around other people's schedules without admitting that she's doing it. She got out with a manila envelope in her hand and a look that made me think of the day she taught me to change a tire by watching Dad do it and then correcting the angle of the jack from the porch like she had the required degree. "I'm not bringing you money," she said before I could even pull my earplugs out. "I'm bringing you a thing I should have brought you 5 years ago." She handed me the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from Granddad that said in 3 short sentences exactly what he'd said in the longer legal document 9 years earlier, minus the percentages and the formal words. That he wanted both of his granddaughters to be able to make choices because choices make a person, that he trusted us to decide how to manage the things that came with his name on them, and that if any of us used what other people say as a reason to do a thing that didn't make sense, we should sit in the garage for 20 minutes with the door open and think about whether the neighbors would pay our bills when things went wrong. The note smelled faintly of gasoline, which I decided was not my imagination. "Aunt Ruth," I said. "She had this. She said she wanted to make sure I brought it with my own hands," my mother said, and then she looked at me in a way that said this was the part she didn't want to say, because sometimes I assign people chores and call them gifts. "I wanted you to know I read it. I wanted you to know I will try to stop designing rooms you didn't ask to sit in." I put the note back in the envelope like it could break if the sun hit it wrong. "You don't have to promise anything," I said. "Just don't call the bank about my address again." She made a sound that might have been a laugh if she could have let it rise. "Fine," she said. "I'll call them about my own problems and leave yours alone." Sunday came with the kind of soft, hot air that makes people linger after service under trees instead of in the parking lot. And the sermon ran 6 minutes long because the pastor went off on a tangent about seed catalogs that somehow marched itself back to the text. In the hallway, Mrs. Klein told me she was moving the sign-up sheet for casseroles to the left because the right always gets a shadow and she can't read names that fall into it, and my father asked if we had time to catch the first inning before Lena started loading boxes. And my mother said out loud that she wasn't going to the club today because she wanted to practice sitting on my couch without telling me how to arrange the cushions. We watched the game with the sound on and the caption set because my father likes to read the things the announcer misses when he tells the story the way he prefers. Lena came by it too with a dolly and a list that she had written on the back of a grocery receipt, and when she picked up the first box her wrists looked like they were ready to hold something without dropping it. She hugged me at the curb with that awkward half back pat that people in this town use when they are trying not to cry where anyone can see them. And she said she would text when she crossed the Florida line even if it was 3 in the morning and I'd be asleep because she needed to say she'd done a thing that had a border on it. On the last Monday of the month, I took the folder out of the safe and set it on my dining table and put everything in the order that told the story in a way a stranger could follow: trust, amendment, rescission, SBA release, landlord receipt, bank plan, certified green cards, pastor's meeting notes that he had written in his tidy print on a half-sheet torn from a legal pad. I added Granddad's note in its stained envelope to the back because it deserved to be where a person reading to the end would find it. I slid the folder back into the safe and then went out to the porch with my coffee to watch the street. Mr. Garcia watered his petunias with a hose that has more duct tape than hose. A kid I don't know practiced skateboard tricks on the curb and looked embarrassed every time a wheel nicked the edge and the board clacked. The air smelled like someone had decided to make bacon on a Monday, which I respect. The radio from my neighbor's open kitchen window carried the ballgame pre-pregame, that part where men talk in slow circles around numbers that will mean something later, and I felt that deep drop and rise in my chest that says the crisis is not over. Because a crisis never is, it just moves to a lower shelf. The difference was that I wasn't standing in a parking lot waiting for a voice to tell me what to sell. The revenge I wanted when my mother said sell in the sun wasn't the kind where anyone goes home carrying a wound you can see. It was this quieter kind where paper sits in the right order, and the next time somebody starts a story for me in the hallway I can nod and keep walking. It was my mother standing up in a fellowship hall and telling people to put their dollars toward jerseys instead of a basket with a bow. It was Deacon Jim backing off because the numbers on his desk said we were people who did what we wrote down to do. It was my father reaching for the remote to turn the volume up instead of down because there wasn't a bill sitting in the corner of the room like a guest who shouldn't have been invited. It cost time and anxiety and a month of thinking about money every time the porch light flickered because the bulb was old. It paid out in a boundary with a door in it instead of a wall, in a sister who could leave town without dragging me behind her like a broken suitcase, in a mother who brought me a note on purpose and let the paper say the part she couldn't. On Tuesday after PDA again, I walked the 3 blocks to the community center to cover the evening shift because the regular desk clerk had texted me a photo of her sunburn and a line that said, "I made choices." And when I turned on the lobby lights, the click of the switches sounded crisp enough to be satisfying. A boy came in to ask about the basketball schedule and whether the gym would be open late because he and his cousins had a tournament starting next week and they wanted to run one more set of drills. And I told him to sign his names on the sheet and not to hang on the rim because it was older than their coach. MS. Patel stopped by with a Tupperware of brownies that she swore she hadn't baked and said she'd sent a note to the bank requesting confirmation that my address had been removed and that she expected to receive it by Thursday and that she would keep a copy in her drawer. Labeled families. At 6, I checked the score on my phone because my father has made me into someone who looks not because the score matters, but because the act of looking has turned into a habit I understand. At 8, I locked the front door and turned off the lobby lights and walked home past the church where the women's group had put a flyer for the youth fund in the glass case and someone had taped it a little crooked. And I resisted the urge to fix it because crooked is how you know a human did it. Back on my porch, the night air felt like the heat had finally noticed people lived here. I sat on the top step with my coffee gone to room temperature and my dog snoring into the crook of my knee, and I let the quiet settle. My phone buzzed once with a text from Lena that said she had made it past the state line and that she had stopped at a gas station with a freezer full of ice cream bars that looked better than they were. And could I remind her to drink water the way I had reminded her to breathe when she had her first recital in the school gym and forgot half the steps? I told her to drink water and not to talk to strangers about her debt as if that were a biography. I told her to sleep when she arrived even if the bed felt like someone else's, because eventually it wouldn't. I put the phone face down like Pastor taught me the night I stayed in his office an hour past closing and learned that sometimes the righteous thing is as boring as not replying. Somebody on the block started a ball game recap a little too loud and the announcer said the bullpen held and the bats remembered what they were for, and in a town where we will talk about innings until the snow comes back that sounded as good a benediction as any. I wasn't going to sell my house. Not now, not to plug a hole, not to make a point for anyone who wanted to keep score. If I ever do sell it, it will be because I need a shorter driveway or a better place to watch the sky turn the color of old peaches in July, and I will make that choice without calling a bank to ask permission. I went inside and put Granddad's note in the top drawer where I keep the tape and the extra keys, and the things you reach for with one hand while the other is still holding something fragile, and I shut the drawer and heard the little wooden click that says you did it right. When I turned off the kitchen light, the window held my face in a small dark square, and I didn't look away. I let it be mine, and then I went to bed without narrating the end, because I've learned that the right ending doesn't need a speech. It just needs you to close the door softly and trust yourself to open it the next morning for reasons that are finally your own.